Well, for the second time in the space of a few months, Julia Gillard has held a lengthy press conference today to try and put to bed the whole AWU slush fund affair that's dogged her for the last 6 months or so. She looked a little nervous at first, but then settled into a typically feisty performance, batting away journalists' questions, taking all comers and trying to answer the many questions that have surrounded the Prime Minister's behaviour as a lawyer at Slater and Gordon some 17 years ago. Now, there were three main areas journalists pursued this afternoon. Firstly, why in 1995, when Julia Gillard did become aware of what had happened with this Workplace Reform Association that was used as a slush fund for allegedly fraudulent activities, when she did become aware of this finally in 1995 and broke off her relationship with union official Bruce Wilson, why didn't she also inform police and the Australian Workers Union, a client of Slater and Gordon? Here was her answer on that.
I did not have in front of me any evidence of criminality or wrongdoing, but there was a lot of rumour about what was happening in the Victorian branch of the AWU at that time. In those circumstances, I came to a personal decision about ending my relationship with Mr Wilson, and I did so. Then, of course, the Slater and Gordon internal review went through, and you see the outcome of that review. I know that there's been a lot of focus on what I should have reported to authorities at that time. Well, you can't report things you do not know.
One of the other key areas of questioning today was about a power of attorney that Julia Gillard had witnessed for also a former union official, Ralph Blewett, a self-confessed fraudster, for the purchase of that property in Fitzroy, which her then-boyfriend Bruce Wilson was to live in. Now, Ralph Blewett has suggested that Julia Gillard did not actually witness that power of attorney, was not actually present when that document was signed. That would be legally very problematic indeed, but Julia Gillard again insisted no wrongdoing.
I did nothing wrong, and I did nothing wrong in the witnessing of this power of attorney. I witnessed thousands and thousands and thousands of documents for clients during an 8-year... I'll answer your question. I witnessed thousands and thousands of documents over an 8-year legal career for clients, and I did that witnessing properly. So it's going to come down to Mr Blewett's word against mine.
She then went on to detail the many things that have been said about Ralph Blewett, none of them kind words indeed, but insisting there that she did witness that power of attorney properly. The third area that journalists pursued was the allegation that $5,000 had been put in her bank account, money ultimately from this slush fund. Well, here Julia Gillard said she's been through as many records as she can get her hands on, has no recollection of receiving $5,000, can't get bank records back to those days. Here's what she said.
I do not, to the best of my knowledge, I do not remember $5,000 being put in my bank account. Across most of my working life, my engagement with ATM machines has been like everybody else's. You get a surprise on the downside when you put your card in and check your account balance, not a surprise on the upside. You're normally very unhappy about how little's in your account rather than happily surprised that there's extra there. That has been my experience over most of my working life. Now, I do not have a memory of this money going into my account. However, it is a long time ago, and so I have taken steps to try and check. I've specifically made inquiries of the Commonwealth Bank. The Commonwealth Bank was mentioned in the report. I did have a Commonwealth Bank account at the time. They have advised me it is not possible to get records from 17 years ago.
There were also questions about why she provided advice in setting up what was called the AWU Workplace Reform Association, which was not authorised by the AWU. Her answer to that was that Ralph Blewett and Bruce Wilson were officials of the AWU. Therefore, she assumed it did have some sort of authority from the AWU. Journalists left after almost an hour without too many more questions to put to the Prime Minister, but then it was straight into question time, and the opposition did take up the case further, and as we'll hear in a moment, will continue this pursuit throughout the week. As you can see from this picture snapped from a Fairfax photographer, Julie Bishop being in discussion there with the opposition leader's Chief of Staff, Peter Gretland, holding a file, Gillard AWU. They're showing no intent on dropping this right now. In fact, all questions in question time this afternoon were devoted to the Prime Minister on this. And as Julie Bishop told me just a short time ago, this will continue throughout this final parliamentary sitting week. I spoke to the Deputy Opposition Leader just a short while ago. Julie Bishop, thanks for your time. You devoted all of your questions in Parliament today to this matter. What evidence is there that the Prime Minister did anything wrong?
Well, today I asked a series of questions about the unauthorised setting up of an incorporated association. The Prime Minister knew that there was no authority from the AWU to set it up. She knew that...
Well, hang on. She says she was acting on behalf of two union officials, that they, therefore, represented the union.
She had a deep familiarity with the union rules, which state that the only people that could set up such an entity with associated bank accounts was the National Executive. There was no resolution of the National Executive. She knew that there was no authority from the AWU, and she was acting on instructions from her then boyfriend, Bruce Wilson, and his sidekick, Ralph Blewett.
They were two officials with the union.
They were officials out of the WA branch. No bank account or entity could be set up other than with the resolution of the National Executive. And she was familiar with the union rules. In fact, she gave detailed advice about these very union rules. And also she misled the Commissioner for Corporate Affairs about the association and its purpose. And that's why I asked the question about why didn't she open a file at Slater and Gordon. Well, and the reason she didn't open a file is, had she done so, it would have alerted her partners and the client, the AWU, that there was an unauthorised association that was set up as a slush fund to benefit her then boyfriend and his sidekick, Ralph Blewett.
Well, let's go through some of what you've said there. Now, the Prime Minister's answer is that it's up to the registrar in WA to decide whether an association has been incorporated properly or not, and they decided that it had been.
Well, that's
it's not
right.
Up to the lawyer advising.
That's not quite right. There has to be a certificate verifying that it complies with the Associations Incorporation Act. The registrar doesn't provide that certificate. The lawyer providing the advice does. Surely she's not suggesting that it was Wilson and Blewett who knew the intricacies of the Associations Incorporation Act. She was the lawyer
she did
providing
provide
the
that
advice.
certificate, and she misled the registrar in that certificate?
In a number of ways. You can't have an association set up with less than 5 members. Blewett and Wilson were members, but she couldn't nominate anyone else. It didn't have the authority of the AWU. Indeed, she should have been aware of the provisions of the Associations Incorporation Act that warned you can't set up an association if the name you use could mislead or confuse people. And by using the name, the Australian Workers' Union, it did mislead people, as Tees Construction said in that interview with the WA Fraud Squad.
Well, the Prime Minister argues that she believed this association was being set up to help in the re-election of union officials that were going to pursue workplace reform. Therefore, it fit the name.
Nowhere in any of the documents does it mention anything about raising money for the purposes of the re-election of union officials. It was not a purpose set out in the detailed documents that she arranged to have filed at Corporate Affairs. And indeed, Corporate Affairs...
This is pretty standard practice for unions to have these sort of re-election funds.
Not according to... well, authorised by the National Executive. That's a very different story. This was done under the cover of this association so that the union wouldn't know about it, and monies that would otherwise have gone to the union were diverted into a slush fund that was for the benefit of 2 people, Wilson and
so you're saying
Blewett.
she deliberately hid this from the National Executive of the AWU?
The AWU were not informed until 1996.
No, but was that a deliberate move on Julia Gillard's part? Because she insists that, and she was asked this today repeatedly, that because they were 2 union officials, Ralph Blewett and Bruce Wilson, that it had union approval.
Well, I say it was deliberate. Her defence must be gross incompetence. She must have been a grossly incompetent lawyer not to look at the basic document when you register an incorporation. Does the association, in this case Wilson and Blewett, they're the only two, do they have the authority to use the name Australian Workers' Union? And the first thing you would do is find the resolution from the AWU, which of course is required by its rules that she was very familiar with.
Okay, but at the end of the day, if this is true, she's what, broken union rules?
No, it's worse than that.
Okay,
it's a lot worse than that.
What has she done that's worse than that?
Breaches of the Associations Incorporation Act and also the creation of a false document, a false instrument, is in fact a breach of the law.
Hang on, the false document you're talking about is what, the power of attorney, or are you talking about the
certificate of incorporation.
Okay.
We didn't even go to the power of attorney, David. They were all questions raised in this press conference. Now, can I point out?
Hang on, you've said that she's possibly broken a law.
The certificate of incorporation and the rules for the association.
But do you have a copy of that?
Yes, I tried to table it.
Okay, and you believe that shows that she has deliberately misled?
Her handwriting puts in Australian Workers' Union as being the name of the association. She wrote that in, and she had no authority from the AWU to put that in. And no less a person than Bill Shorten, her own cabinet colleague, said last Wednesday that this was unauthorised by the union, and the Prime Minister would have known that.
But he also said that she did nothing wrong.
Oh,
and
again, of course he said that.
Again, it gets to the Prime Minister's claim that she believed she was acting with the knowledge of the AWU because these were two union officials.
Well, I think we'll find that Bill Shorten, as at 1995, had a lot more knowledge of Julia Gillard's involvement in this slush fund than he's let on today. But today we set the scene. This is just the beginning, David. We set the scene about what she knew in 1992 when she set up an unauthorised slush fund for the purposes of receiving contributions from companies like Tees contractors who paid money into this slush fund unbeknown to the union, and the only two signatories on that were Wilson and Blewett.
Well, once again, there you've said that she set up a slush fund. Now, she adamantly denies
that was her description.
Well, the slush fund was the description, but she insists she didn't set it up.
No, I didn't.
She provided legal advice in setting up this incorporation.
She provided the legal advice for the incorporation of an association, and she also said she knew, in her statement to Slater and Gordon, she knew that the association would hold the bank account into which the monies from companies and the like would be put. Now, that bank account was not authorised. Any competent lawyer, any first-year lawyer would have made sure that the association that she was advising on had the authority of the AWU to open a bank account, because she was advising on a slush fund for the benefit of the union team.
It seems to get back to whether this had union authority or not.
Well, it didn't.
And Julia Gillard's belief at the time that it did.
Well, how could a lawyer who understands the union rules and is intimately familiar with the union rules, not know that individual union members just can't go running around the country setting up bank accounts and setting up associations? I mean, it's so obvious, David. The point is she's using the tactic of holding a press conference to avoid answering questions in the Parliament, because she knows the consequences of misleading the Parliament are far greater than the consequences of misleading journalists.
Well, she did answer your questions in the Parliament today, but you're signalling...
No, she answered them by referring to her press conference. She wasn't prepared to say in the Parliament the words that she said at the press conference. And so this is the tactic. You just hold the press conference, answer some questions, and then refuse to repeat those words in the Parliament, because she knows if she repeats the words in the Parliament, there are serious consequences if you're found to have misled the Parliament.
Well, the Prime Minister accused you of misleading Parliament today in relation to this as well. She pointed to what she said were a number of false claims, suggesting that she set up a fund, suggesting she advised Ralph Blewett on a defamation case, suggesting she advised on the purchase of the Fitzroy property, all incorrect.
That's not right. In relation to advising Ralph Blewett on the defamation action, I will be referring to the statement of her former partners in relation to that. In relation to the conveyancing file, she went to the auction with Bruce Wilson to purchase a house that he was going to live in.
She was his partner at the time.
So she went to the auction to select the house that he would live in. She was the lawyer who witnessed the power of attorney that would give him the authority, her boyfriend, the authority to deal with the conveyancing of this property on behalf of Ralph Blewett. And she's not yet answered the questions of the journalists, whether she witnessed that power of attorney. Ralph Blewett.
Well, she said she witnessed thousands of
Well, hang
documents
on,
and did
Ralph
so
Blewett.
properly.
This is about a house that her boyfriend is about to live in. Ralph Blewett lived in Perth. She practiced law in Melbourne. Did Ralph Blewett fly to Melbourne to have the power of attorney witnessed, or did she fly to Perth to have the power of attorney witnessed? And this was all about the conveyancing for a house that her boyfriend was going to live in.
So, Julie Bishop, this isn't the end of it.
No, this is just the beginning.
Thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
More to come in the coming final days of Parliament for the year.